Hello, I'm Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this May 3rd Wednesday evening West weather update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start here, we're looking at really an April summary of precipitation anomalies. We just transitioned into May here, thought I'd do an update on the month that we just saw. For most folks across the West region, it was a drier month. California finally got a reprieve from all the precipitation and snowfall that we saw earlier this spring in 2023. One area that did get quite a bit of rainfall even in April here, the Pacific Northwest, the Willamette Valley, and Oregon, saw above average rainfall. Parts of Washington, eastern Washington included in that, saw a bit more active of a pattern, at least over the last 30 days. Just about anywhere else, though, across the western region, if you look across the Intermountain West, the Snake River Valley, some precipitation in the upper Snake River, some precipitation in the Treasure Valley, but not significant amounts, well above average. And then going south from there, most folks below average. Now, despite being drier, if we jump over and look at temperature summaries from that same time period, it's really colder across the board. So despite not having a ton of precipitation events, a lot of clouds and cold fronts coming through the area, we were still a bit colder than average, save for maybe some parts of the lower Colorado River Basin. Now, trying to explain what we saw from the jet stream during that time that helped to bring about this pattern that we just looked at over the last 30 days. This is one way to do it. We're looking at 500 millibars way up in the atmosphere, height anomalies through the month of April in 2023. And really, areas where you see this bluer or purple color, or we have lower heights in the atmosphere, areas where you see this red-orange color are where we had ridges in the atmosphere. So here's our ridges, and here's our troughs. The jet stream will tend to flow in between these two features. And so just looking at the Pacific Northwest, this area in particular, we know by looking at this map that at least in April of 2023, the jet stream preferred to flow around this trough and into the Pacific Northwest. That's why we saw so many of these systems come around and impact parts of Washington and western Oregon, but really left the rest of this western region without that jet stream flow, which did bring a lot of those systems through earlier in the year. Now, if I take you back and look at this same map just from March, big difference. Now we had this big upper level trough sitting right over the western U.S., the flow coming around it like this and coming right into parts of central and southern California. That brought a lot of that precipitation and the snowfall in the Sierra Nevadas. That was the difference from March to April with this trough situated right over California. Now, despite two very different months, March and April, I still think we saw some of the influence from that negative PDO. Now, that negative PDO is really just this kind of horseshoe of colder ocean waters off the west coast of the United States. That has helped to bring temperatures on the lower side across the western U.S. We saw that looking out over the last 30 days, but it also helps to influence the development of those upper level troughs, at least generally in this area. And that can at times focus flow, at least somewhere across the western U.S. In March, it was in California. We saw a lot of stories related to that. Over the last few weeks, it's really been focused more on the Pacific Northwest. Oregon, Washington, we saw more of the precipitation focus there. But I mention this because at least for now, even in early May, this negative PDO system will tend to continue that regime. Colder temperatures across the western U.S. and perhaps some general troughiness, bringing active weather in at times. We have had some brief warm-ups. We talked about a brief warm-up at the end of the last week, getting that snow melt season started, but we really quickly transitioned out of that. It was a brief warm-up. It wasn't a long-lasting one. And now we've had a reprieve from that snow melt as we've had yet another upper-level trough situate itself off California. And here that is. This is the current satellite imagery looking off just the coast of the central California. Here, big upper-level low in the clouds evident, bringing rainfall into the central coastline. San Francisco getting some showers this afternoon and evening. Yesterday, Central Valley saw showers, even some thunderstorms associated with this upper-level low. Now tonight, getting into Thursday, this will move onshore in California, bringing some rainfall to Southern California and the coastline there. It'll move up through Nevada and start to impact parts of the Intermountain West as we go through the day, Thursday and finally into Friday. Now, one thing we did mention last week that this wouldn't be a repeat or again one of these big powerful systems that we saw in March or January. In fact, if we jump over and look at the NOAA All Hazards map, valid here as of this afternoon, not the most colorful map, certainly that we've seen this year. Just some wind advisories. We do have some lingering flood watches and warnings, but those are pertaining more to snow melt and precipitation. We do have some winter weather advisories in the transverse ranges in Southern California associated with some snow expected tonight. But by and large, apart from the rain, a little bit of wind, not a huge newsmaker as far as weather, other than one kind of benefit here is it slowed down that snowmelt season a bit. So we were a little bit concerned if we had one of these prolonged heat waves, we'd really accelerate that snowmelt season and stress some of these rivers and streams. Getting kind of a break from those higher temperatures, I don't think is a bad thing, all things considered. Now, if we just look at that near-term immediate forecast, this is looking at simulated rainfall. Really over Wednesday evening, I'll just step you through as that upper level low spins off the coast of California. More rainfall expected to come into the central coastline through this evening tonight, some of that getting into the Central Valley. You'll notice some of this now focusing early tomorrow on Thursday on Southern California. Some snow making its way up into the central Sierra Nevadas. Not expecting intense snowfall accumulations from that, but we do have precipitation moving in to the Sacramento Valley as well on the day Thursday. As we get into Thursday evening, now we have some precipitation getting into Idaho and the Snake River Valley. And then finally, as we extend this through Thursday evening, you'll notice that upper level low, which was situated off California, has made its way up into eastern Oregon, parts of northern Nevada, spinning up there, bringing precipitation into eastern Washington, potentially significant amounts of rainfall here, with some precipitation getting into eastern Oregon, and then lingering precip moving through the Snake River Valley again as this low pressure system spinning just kind of right here in the southern part of Idaho. Now, the Snake River Valley, this is a time of year when we typically start to peak in terms of some of that water storage, those reservoir storages. And if we jump over here and look at least at the upper Snake River Basin, we saw a good year really for snowpack. Some areas that feed these reservoirs in the upper Snake River Basin sitting about 133% of their normal snowpack. We looked at maps of this throughout the year. Now, certainly we saw California, Utah jumping off the page with those 200% values above normal, but parts of the northern Intermountain West had decent years, above average certainly. But throughout the winter, we talked about how we could even stand to do a little bit better than that. And what I meant by that is if we take a closer look at some of these reservoirs, American Falls being the largest out here in the east, and we take a look at this water year graph of this reservoir over time, that blue line here, the small blue line, is the current year. Last year, in green, we were above, at least at this point in early May, than we are this year. And our average there in red was even further above that. So despite having what was really an above average year for snowpack and even precipitation, we're not quite there at our average reservoir levels, or even compared to where we were last year. And I don't think it's at any fault of what we had this year. If you look closely at the slope of this line, it's pretty aggressive. I mean, it's right on last year's impact, maybe even a little bit steeper as it encroaches here through April, but we just started lower. And we started well below that average as a result of droughts over the last few years. So that's how we kind of talked about that. We were doing above average in terms of this year, in terms of snowpack and rainfall, but we could have done a little bit better to help push us toward average in some of these reservoirs here in the Snake River Valley. So that's kind of one thing we've been keeping an eye on. Not all of these reservoirs have peaked, like American Falls. Some of these that are more snow-fed, that map I showed you earlier, will peak a little bit later as some of this upper elevation snow begins to melt. It's a situation we're keeping an eye on because we didn't have that blockbuster year here like we did, for example, in California. Now, another area we've been watching for in terms of reservoirs, Lake Powell in Arizona. If I take you back to a 30-day look at the lake levels here above Glen Canyon Dam. I always want to say Glen Campbell Dam, but no, it's Glen Canyon Dam. He's not a country music artist. We talked about that high flow release experiment. That was here in late April. That brought the lake levels down just a bit, actually bumped up the Mead Lake levels as that is downstream from this. But since they've shut off those pipes, those water levels have begun to rise. I think they're going to rise considerably more here over the coming weeks as that, again, above average Utah snowpack, above average Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona snowpack begins to make its way into the hydrology here. We're going to see these reservoirs respond, and I think we're going to head past this peak that we hit last year in June of 2022. So we have quite a ways to go to get there. We've really just started that melt season here. I think over the coming weeks we'll see a good response from Lake Powell, improving the water situation as a whole all the way through the lower Colorado River Valley. Now, last kind of stop on the reservoir tour is California. You'll notice in the northern part of the state, a lot of these reservoirs here topping out pretty close to that maximum holding capacity. Now, no major concerns here. They are releasing water as needed. These are more rain-fed reservoirs. As you go further south, at least in the Sierra Nevadas, coming down to kind of the bottom of the map here, Millerton, Pine Flat, McClure, these reservoirs are more snow-fed, so they're kind of waiting on that snow melt to really get going. We saw some of that last week, and a lot of these dams have been releasing water kind of in preparation for this huge snow melt season that's expected. So even though some of these values are low right now, even below their historical average in Pine Flat and Millerton, that's really as an attempt to kind of appease what is really coming down the pipe over here in the next few weeks. So we're going to be watching this closely. The release of some of that water has helped to cause some of the issues, unfortunately, when we were talking about the Tulare Lake Basin, an area that has been filling up with water, unfortunately flooding quite a bit of agricultural fields over the last few weeks as a result of this. So right now, that snowmelt season kind of not on a pause, but certainly decelerated quite a bit. We'll look out into the forecast to get an idea of where we're going to go in terms of those temperatures, when we might see this issue peak up again as we melt more of that snowpack. And we still have quite a bit of snowpack, unfortunately, to melt through in the Sierra Nevadas. Now, long-term forecast, I'll take you just through the next few days here. We talked about this earlier, looking at the simulated rainfall. If I take you through Thursday night into early Friday, most of that precipitation focusing on the Intermountain West, the Snake River Valley, eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, some lingering drizzle perhaps in parts of California, but really they get a break through the day on Friday as the storm mostly focuses on getting out of the Intermountain West through Friday. As we go into Saturday, we do have another weak system coming through Northern California and Southern Oregon. We kind of have a series of weak systems here that get weaker as we go through the weekend. This first one just coming on shore here Friday night going into Saturday morning. As I take this out through Saturday, you'll notice it impacting parts of Northern California, getting into Nevada, southeastern Oregon, eventually making its way up into the Snake River Valley. So more water coming for the eastern Snake River Valley. More snowfall, potentially in the far northern Sierras and the Klamath Mountains, and then getting up into the upper elevations in the Intermountain West as well. This is all the way into Sunday evening. As I take this through Monday of next week, this is May 8th, we have another one of these weak systems kind of flying through here on that upper level flow. Again, weaker and weaker and weaker as we go through each successive system. This one bringing rainfall potentially into the central coast of California and the central Sierra Nevadas as well. And as it makes its way into the Intermountain West, focusing again on the Snake River Valley, eastern Oregon, and the upper elevations of Idaho as well, eventually moving into Montana as well. That exits the area all the way out here May 10th next week, when we really get a break from this active pattern going into next week. So if we look just at a summary of that whole 7-day forecast, precipitation anomalies from the GFS here, Central California, even Southern California tonight into tomorrow, expecting some precipitation. Certainly an area that's getting a lot of focus here is the Idaho, the Snake River Valley, eastern Oregon. You saw a lot of these systems impact California, and then they kind of wrap up in the Intermountain West, focusing precipitation there, and then eastern Washington benefiting as well from some of this anomalous rainfall. One area getting a break, that jet stream really kind of focusing on California into the Snake River Valley, is the Pacific Northwest. So the Willamette Valley and the western Washington area getting a break from a lot of their precipitation that they saw in April. Again, just as a result of that flow focusing more further south. Temperatures as of this time period, just over the next 7 days, not a huge surprise as these low pressure systems come through, right? Clouds, rain, cold fronts, that tends to bring temperatures on the lower side. California expecting colder temperatures, Nevada, Oregon as well. Not expecting major freezes from this, even though some of these temperatures here, 12, 13 degrees below average, that's relative to, early to mid-May. So it's much harder to get a freeze out of some of these systems. I think we'd have to see a more bona fide trough. And to have any concern about that, that would take quite a bit of a system to bring that as a concern. Now, if we want to forecast out beyond that, out to May 10th and beyond, we'll take a look at the jet stream here, and I'll make this valid as of Wednesday evening. This is that upper level low we were talking about spinning just off the coast of California. That's going to help focus some of that precipitation this evening and into tomorrow in Southern California. If I take this through the period, you'll notice that we just walked through this forecast. That flow is going to focus itself on California and into the Intermountain West. That's why we saw those successive systems come through Northern California. This is Monday, May 8th. So I take this toward Wednesday, May 10th. You'll notice that troughing moving over the Intermountain West, and now we're starting to build what could be a ridge here across the western U.S. Ridges tend to bring warmer temperatures, drier conditions beneath them. So as I take this Thursday, May 12th, May 11th, I apologize, Friday, May 12th, into next week and all the way out to May 13th, at least looking at this ECMWF forecast here, we now see a rather amplified ridge moving over the western U.S. That would lead me to believe, at least taking this forecast for what it's worth, that after this active period, the colder weather through California and the Intermountain West, that we might be flipping back drier and warmer for parts of Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and perhaps even parts of Idaho as well, as that ridge settles over the region next weekend. Now, at least right now, the ECMWF doesn't have a major change beyond that. So active through the next 7 days, then I think we turn the hose off the 7 days beyond that. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, just to get another kind of view or idea of this, if we look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, that's really through the middle to end of next week. Notice they have higher chances of precipitation across parts of the Pacific Northwest, the northern Intermountain West, with cooler temperatures across California. Not a huge surprise to see that. That's kind of that active period, the end of that active period that we just looked at. But if we take a look at their 8 to 14 day outlook, that's really that week 2 time frame. That's when we shift that pattern back to warmer Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, even parts of Idaho as well. And now we have even a drier signal there in the Intermountain West. So that's really where the forecast is sitting right now. If we look out even beyond that, we do see perhaps a shift. But before we do that, take a quick look at just the 7 day forecast. This is looking really toward next weekend and beyond. So maybe May 11th, Thursday of next week. Let's look 7 days beyond that. Warmer temperatures for Washington, Oregon, parts of California. Some of these weather that were colder than average here in these specific areas. It's hard to tell. What I really see is kind of a general warming trend across this area. Precipitation over that same time period. Again, underneath these upper atmospheric ridges, we tend to be warm and dry. So not a surprise to see really from May 11th through May 18th, a drier signal here in the ECMWF precipitation anomalies. Now, I talked about trying to give you a sense of a forecast beyond that, really kind of thinking mid to the end of May here in early May. And there's a bit of a mixed picture, at least right now. To start, we'll take a look at the MJO. It has been careening across the globe really over the last 20 to 30 days or so, making almost a donut here as it has just rounded the equatorial regions of the Earth. Right now, situated over Indonesia, the maritime continent, quickly expected to transverse into the Pacific Ocean, where it will enter phase 6, and then ultimately, decent agreement right now from these forecast models that we will be going from 6 into phase 7 through mid-May. Now, at least looking at this, with all the momentum we have here from the MJO, I would expect if we get into phase 7 with this much momentum, there's a decent chance we move all the way in to phase 8 for the MJO. That could bring back that active pattern that we're seeing now back toward the western U.S. Now, one reason we could see some competing factors here, as we talked earlier about that negative PDOI, I think the influence of that is going to wane as we pick up strength with that El Niño going forward. And we've certainly seen that over the last few days. In fact, if I jump over and look at those sea surface temperatures, we're really already warming up ocean temperatures in the eastern Pacific. As these increase in strength and extend across the equator, that will tend to help to warm up some of this negative PDO signature we see here off the coast, which will reduce the influence of that. Now, is that all going to happen over the next 20 days to influence the forecast enough? I'm not quite sure. My forecast confidence is a little bit lower there as a result of those competing signals there. But just the fact that this MJO is careening through the Pacific, potentially all the way into phase 8, I think there is a chance that we could have one more active period in the western U.S., perhaps for California, just at the end of May. Not a super high confidence in that forecast right now. In fact, even looking at some of the global models, the ECMWF weeklies, some of the other ensembles, they're not really suggesting that right now, that we flip back active. That's just me kind of extrapolating what I'm seeing here as far as the MJO. So we'll keep an eye on that. Not a huge confidence in that forecast right now. One forecast we do have quite a bit of confidence in is the El Niño forecast going forward. And we've really seen this shift aggressively over the last few weeks. We talked about it in the last video and report. This is looking at the IRI model-based INSO probabilities. That's the probability that we'll see El Niño through the summer, or really through the end of 2023. That's that red bar on this graph, the probabilities are on the left here, you'll notice as we go through these months, May, June, July, August, probabilities of El Niño in the Pacific rapidly increasing up to 80 to 85%. By June, July, and August, to the point where July, August, September, really the end of summer, we're all the way up approaching 90%. That's about as confident as you can be in that sort of lead window here. And the confidence has gotten pretty strong here that we will be seeing an El Niño in the Pacific, at least at some point in 2023. Whether it happens in June, July, or we enter all the way in August could have some impacts on the forecast. But right now, expecting that at least by September 2023, we will see El Niño conditions. And really, if we just jump back and look at those sea surface temperature anomalies, we can see that water warming up fairly aggressively, certainly just off the coast of South America where it usually begins and then begins to stretch across the equator here. Really, once we start to see these temperatures warm up, that's when we'll know that we'll be entering some sort of an El Niño this summer. That's an area we'll watch closely. That's all I have so far this evening. Thank you all for watching.